This is Channel 2 Boston. Local broadcast of Painting with Pittard is made possible by our members in partnership with the Prescott House Nursing Home, located in North Andover, Massachusetts, and owned and operated by the Solomon family. And with the Magic Touch Art Studio in Maynard, Massachusetts, owned and operated by Chuck O'Neill.
Paint with Pittard 2 with Lynne Pittard is brought to you by Line Knuckle Artist Brushes and Graphics Plus of Florida, Incorporated. Paint with Pittard 2 with Lynne Pittard.
Interesting plays of light on the leaves that seem to shine like gold as they dance in a breeze is this beautiful scene that we're going to be accomplishing today. We have a little path, a river, and the light it just sparkles, and this is what we're going to try to do with some new techniques today. What I've had to do to prepare for this particular painting is I've mixed my paints with thinner to soften them so they will work properly using sponges. I thought that would be something fun to work with today. So we're going to do some of the techniques in the painting with sponges. We are not using basic white. I'd like us to go down to the palette and I'll show you what I've done to my paints. I took my creamy bodied paints and a little thinner on a fan brush and dropped thinner into the paint and worked the thinner in thoroughly to get the paints very soft and creamy. And to be sure your paints are the right consistency, what you want to concern yourself with is there's no stick. It seems to drop off of a palette knife. So you just keep working little drops of thinner into the paint, kneading it thoroughly, and then test the paint by letting it drop off the knife. This is what will make this particular composition and the techniques that we're using today work best. So you want to be sure you don't have a sticky paint and work in this particular manner. Since I pre-mixed all my paints, I've done this in advance to all my paints. I'm going to move this over to my palette and get rid of this mixing palette so I have a nice clean surface to work on. And I think we're ready to begin. What we want to do first is locate. I think should refer back to the original painting just for a second. In doing that, you can look and notice that the locations of the little road on the far side of the little embankment by the river, there's far distant trees with a little light filtering through. Now these areas are the ones I would like us to concern ourselves with first. Since my canvas is clean and dry, let's go up to the canvas now. And there's nothing on there. Once again, I have no basic white, nothing on my dry canvas. I'm going to sketch in and locate these. To do that, I'm going to use a fan brush, a little bit of thinner, and go down to the palette and use just a touch of burnt umber into a wash-like consistency. This is going to be like a watercolor technique, and it's a lot of fun to do with your oils and works beautifully. So if you see how loose and fluid that paint is, let's go up to the canvas and we will locate the areas or the masses that we're going to be working with. The distant back side of the road is just a little line that runs back, and notice I'm not trying to make a straight line. I keep it very loose. That's going to be all of the background. There's a narrow path that seems to run beside this that I'm going to place in, and that's going to be the area for the path. There's an embankment of land that's going to be working. We'll kind of just put little lines on that so it shows a little bit of a land mass area. And then there's a little piece of land here. This begins to divide up our canvas in different areas. The paint moves easily because of the thinner. So what I will do is kind of enhance that now with a little more coloring, still using thinner continually in my paints. So I'll take a little drop more thinner, touch more of the burnt umber, and actually this is kind of what I tell my students we're going to watercolor with our oil paints, and this is what we're actually doing. Okay, as we go back up, I want a couple of little dark areas, and I'm just going to kind of smudge the paint and lift up for a baseline along the trees. This area, once again, is going to be land, and this will be a little foreground land. I'll add some more paint to that later. Now I'm going to have to start adding a little color interest. To capture the fall colors, we want depth back into the trees, so I'm going to just kind of blot the brush a little bit and add to the brush a little yellow ochre. This is going to make a little change. Once again, I'm looking for thin, watery type paint or weak moving paint, and we'll go up and we're just going to start smudging in the background. Now I'm going to do this very quickly, randomly, but I'm actually planning and thinking about where the color patches are going because I'm going to be putting foreground trees. As I keep going back down to the palette, I'm going to not only use ochre, I'm going to occasionally touch into a little alizarin crimson. Now this is quite fluid, and occasionally it may start to run a little bit. If it runs, I don't concern myself. I just take a paper towel and blot occasionally, and that makes interesting little patterns happen. Let's repeat a little of that ochre color down into the water, just smudging it in for like a reflection type of effect. And you have to admit, this doesn't look too hard, does it? It's a lot of fun and very effective, and this is what we're looking for, a good effect in the painting. Okay, a little more thinner. I've begun to add a little bit of alizarin crimson to the brush, and I'm going to make some smudgy little red marks. Notice I let them kind of mix together and intermix. Boy, does that look busy. But it's a beautiful backdrop. Let's put a little over in this area. And as soon as I get a little of this worked in the water area and in the background, we need to start introducing a new color. Let's try some sap green. There's always a little greenery left in the fall season. And if you look at my palette, you'll notice I haven't really cleaned the brush. I'm still working in the same mixing spot with these fluid intermixed colors. Let's start blocking in some greens over on this side. Some people wonder how in the world this comes out to be such a beautiful painting as the finished painting. What I'm trying to eliminate are the white spots, putting a little bit more down along the road edge because we want more underbrush showing there. And just keep kind of mixing up different mixes of alizarin, sap, and ochre until I get that entire white area blocked in the background. And let's make sure we just kind of smudge it together. Sometimes I use the paper towel and just blot occasionally, creating different things. We need a little of this coloring in the water. I think if you've never tried doing your oils this particular way, you'll have a lot of fun doing it. It's very, once again, effective with just for a background in your mass areas. It's going to make the water very pretty. I have to admit it doesn't look too good right now. But I think as we build on it, you'll see a very striking change take shape. What I like to do now, once I've got that block in, is switch brushes. What works best is to go to a number 16, and now I want to block in that little road. And I'm going to start with a little of my thicker titanium white, the tiny touch of umber in it, and I'm going to just kind of block the road in. And this is thicker bodied paint, and I'm just kind of paving the road down and just blocking it in to eliminate the raw canvas. As I come over to the left, where I'm going to have light filtering through the trees, I'm going to go with a little more of the white and just have that bleached out a little bit more. Notice I'm not trying to leave any hard lines along the roadside. If you want to put some interesting little shadows, you could add a little speck of blue to that brush, just a tiny speck into your mix with the brown and white, and just put a few little patches of different colors, and those will begin to indicate little shadow things, just happenings on the road at this stage. The foreground little area of land, we're going to block in with a little more of umber and white, just a little touch of white. And let's block this in. Now, these are very close in relationship to their values, but we're going to darken a band in there and change that a little bit. Okay, that doesn't look too difficult so far. What I would like to do now is go back to the fan brush and clean it. And I want to strengthen a couple of areas that need to be quite dark. And I will use stronger pigment to do that. So we'll use just a little more umber, touch of green in it, because I don't want it to be too brown, just a touch of green. And let's go back down along the baseline of the road, and we're just going to kind of tap that in so the underbrush, maybe a few patches of dark. Now, where I'm placing these dark areas are going to end up being a good area of contrast for the tree trunks and just things that are going to definitely be important. And you'll notice right along underneath the bench, underneath the baseline of the land, I'm going to repeat this and darken in there. But this time, I'm going to pull down on it, so it helps give a little bit of a reflective illusion. There's going to be a tree in the center, and I want that tree to cast a shadow, so I pick up a little more pigment, maybe a touch of blue in it, and just darken in this area, and pull it down. You can sometimes just lightly skim over it. Because your paints aren't very thick as you apply them, it'll work quite well. Very loose technique. We can even darken and separate the land and the grass with a little bit of the dark mix that's on our brush. An uplift will give a little bit of a grassy indication. Okay, so we have a block in. Let's glance back real quickly at the finished painting so you can see how I've roughed in a foundation, and this is what I intend on building on. So if you look, you can see that we have the light road, we have the water, but we don't have that light glow in the actual light filtering through the trees and on the water. So this is what we're going to try to achieve next. I like to do that with a clean, dry 1-inch brush. Now I won't be using thinner in my paints. I'm going to allow them to be a little thicker. So I'm going to go to some basic white, and I'm going to remove this top sheet that I mixed on, kind of pre-planned and had a piece of disposable. So I'll have some clean mixing areas so I can keep the fall colors clean. With this basic white, I'm going to add a tiny little touch of Prussian. And since my body of my paint is a thicker consistency, it's going to cover more easily. So let's go back up to the canvas and create a little patch of light kind of in the distance in the trees. I'm just kind of patting it on to keep it from overpowering or overcoloring. And it makes it almost as if you can see through the trees. There's a couple of areas that we want to work with. If the paint doesn't come off easily, I wipe the brush, reload, and then I patch it in again. It does intermix slightly, but then again, it gives some interesting color changes. There's a stream of light that filters through the trees that seems to be illuminating the road over on this left edge that we would like to try to achieve. To do that, I usually just use a little white and a touch of that blue, but I have to put a little more paint, and once again, this is my soft white. And I'm going to come to the canvas, and I'm just going to streak this slightly, just kind of catch it and drag. Even if you disturb a little bit of the background coloring, don't be too concerned, because it's going to filter through nicely. I need a little more white in that. Let's do that with a few. I'm just grazing the canvas very gently, just kind of streaking it in with that type of look. Even though I bump into the road lightly, I'll just put a little more white down in there and bring it a little brighter. Okay, even though that looks fairly indistinct, this is what I want to achieve at this stage. To create more interest, you could use a paper towel, or you could use a sponge, which is what we're going to be using in a moment, to kind of blot and kind of let these intermingle and create some more of those texture type of pattern effects. So I'm just still concerning myself with a little interest. Even down in the water area, you can do that. And it makes nice patterned effects that are very loose that would take quite a bit of time if you used a brush. Okay, with the foundation established, let's go in with the liner brush and let's try to pull up a few trunks so you begin to get the feeling of those background trees. To achieve that, it's best to use your liner brush. I have a little mini palette here that has the same mixes that I have on my larger palette, but I'll use just a little bit of thinner in it to make it move more easily, and come up with the liner and pull a few soft, distant, delicate trunks back there. And I'm just barely letting the tip graze into the paint and have a few little distant tree trunks. Sometimes they seem to disappear, other times they seem to have more distinction, and I don't want to get them too patterned or too uniform. Just little filtering trees back in the distance. If they get too hard, just take your finger and tap them. That kind of lifts the paint off and breaks it up slightly. Okay, in the water area, I didn't get enough of my light color there. In fact, I almost forgot it. Let's go back for a moment. That's the nice thing, if I can find my 1-inch brush. Okay, we'll use the fan brush. And we'll use a little basic white with the blue. And we'll come up to the canvas, and we're going to bring a little bit of light patch right down into the water. I'm just pulling vertically. Okay, just a little more. This is where the light kind of seems to filter through the trees. And it's very streaky. I'm not overbrushing. If I just barely graze it, kind of has that nice loose effect. Maybe a little streak here or there. That helps to create more interest into the water area. So we now have put plays of light both in the background and into the water area. The full character of the painting really gets developed as you go into detail, but we're not quite ready for it yet. We need the area of those interesting tree trunks to go ahead and really develop a style to the painting. We're going to be getting into sponges in just a minute, and you're going to be very surprised how that develops the painting more rapidly. And of course, in this time frame, it needs to be a little rapid, but you can take your times and build more structure to your painting if you feel comfortable with that. I'm taking thinner. This is my odorless thinner, and quite a bit of my burnt umber. Sometimes I add a speck of blue to make it much darker, almost like a Van Dyke, and really making a puddle of paint that I can use to structure those tree trunks. Now, you want to keep your paints flowing nicely. I have to stress that because most beginners have a tendency not to put enough fluid in their paint. We're going to come up and locate those front silhouetted trees that are planted along the embankment. This one on the left over here is fairly narrow, and let me see if I can get out of the way of this so I can show you just how that brush travels. It will begin to mix, and it will lighten as it goes up. That's going to be one of my smaller trees. I'm going to reload the brush on the palette, making sure I have a good saturation of paint. Come back up, and let's let this one angle slightly. And it can go right in front of the other one. I don't want to do too much in the way of trunks, because I find that we'll even have a few little grasses, create a little too much break in there. I'm just going to smudge this. Notice how I catch the bottom and kind of drag it over. Kind of helps create a shadow from that light down onto the embankment. You don't have to do that, but I like to do that sometimes by planting grass or pulling a shadow down. That helps to plant your object. We have a very interesting tree up in the center, and so we're going to come more. And I don't want to lean everything down to the left, so I'm going to lean this one just a little bit off towards the right and bring this nice silhouetting tree. And I'm just dragging, if I can get my hand out of the way there, that particular paint. And sometimes I go back over it and let it be a little thicker. If you want, at this time, you can also come down into the water area a little bit and just wiggle a little bit like these are reflections in the water. But don't let them be too strong, so just smudge them a little bit. Let them just be little ripples. See how that breaks that up? This is a nice effect. We need a smaller tree next to this one, so let's go in and have another one to create a little more interest. Just tap a little dark down in there, and you'll end up getting some action and things happening on the ground. Once again, I'm not as concerned with the tight detail because I can pull these objects into more structure later. Notice my little finger that I'm using to kind of smudge and soften the hard areas. I don't need to have a lot of distinction there. Okay, there is another heavy branch that seems to be on the foreground land that we want to try to capture. We've kind of lost that foreground corner over here, so we'll come back and darken that. But let's bring this one in across the water, and it kind of heads up. Now, I need to put more paint on that brush and more fluid so it'll come off more easily. So if you find your paint's not performing for you, just go in, reload, and let's see if I can stay out of the way of the camera, and bring that on up and over. Notice how it mixes with the light colors and creates different things happening. This is what you want to allow to happen. If it gets a little large, just make it a larger branch. Just make sure you plan your objects and try to capture them as best you can. I want to go back before I get started and reestablish that front foreground dark. I find that it's very important to get that dark in there because I'm going to be building on it. And due to the fact that I'm working with my paints thinned down with my odorless thinner, I want the paints to have a few moments to set up. So let's go back up to the canvas, and I switch to a little mini fan brush and come down on the bottom right-hand corner over here, and let's just darken in that area, occasionally lifting up to create a contrast against that water edge. Notice how I just kind of flip the brush upward to create a little interest. A little thinner in the brush and a little more paint, and we'll come back and we'll create a few little dark patches along the edge of the side of the road. Notice how I just kind of come in real close here with the fan brush, and notice how I just kind of really tap the brush gently to get a little paint on there and lift up to create those little grassy patches, maybe a little down over there. And if I want to design it a little bit, I just tap. And it creates some nice, interesting effects. If you'd like grass, you can always add a touch of green to it. You don't want to get too vibrant, although there's a lot of green in the fall colors, and it keeps a little softer tone to all these warm, vibrant browns and all. So let's come back up here and add just a little greenery. Excuse me. Okay. We have rocks to put in, and to do that, I'm going to use my number 16 flat brush. The number 16 flat brush is a great way to block in your forms of your rocks. Once again, I block them in, and then I design them. I'm going to use a little Van Dyke with blue, or umber with blue, on this brush. A little touch of my white, just so it's a little grayed. And let's come in and block in some little stones. I'm just kind of tapping them in this area right now. I will design them more carefully, and I'm using kind of the side of the brush and just pressing. These don't look too well at this stage, but one of the fun things about this is as you go back and work in your paints, you can develop these forms a little better. I need a little more dark on the bottom side of that brush. Got a little bit of light on the top side. And let's go in there and see if we can just kind of touch in some little stones. having a little light on the top edge almost gives me the feeling of a rock or two. I want a little more dark at the shadow edge here. Okay, I'll need to work on that some more, but I want to get into the sponge painting. The sponges that I use, I pick up in a hardware store. They're very soft sponges. They're kind of like kitchen sponges, but they're very, very porous. And this is what you want to look for. Natural sponges are a little bit expensive to dirty up with oil, so I use these. They tear very easily, and I usually break them up into quarters. And I make sure that after I've torn them, that I tatter them or fray them slightly. And I've already pre-done that to a couple of pieces of some sponge. And don't forget, I pre-mixed my paints and softened them, so this technique would work very well. Since I'm trying to get a lot covered in this particular show, and to show you some of these effects, and this is one I would love for you to experiment with and try different sponges to get different effects, I want you to always keep in your mind consistency. First, it's not a stiff sponge, and your paints are creamed very, very soft. And all of my paints have been pre-creamed. I'm going to take the sponge and come over to my odorless thinner, dip it in it, and squeeze it. This is going to leave some moisture in the sponge. Not drippy wet, but I squeeze out the excess. That'll let the paints release more easily. We're going to start with a dark mix of some sap green and alizarin crimson. I'm just going to kind of pat it into the sponge, and I'm kind of blotting in the sponge. And if you can see on the palette, by the time I come over with the soft sponge, it's going to give me some interesting textured effects. Let's try that up on the canvas. I want a dark area over here on the right for that tree, and I'm just kind of placing the texture. Notice how you can see through it. This is a beautiful effect for your lacy leaves. As you run out of paint, it'll begin to block in a little more. Let's go down to the palette, tap into some more color using sap green and alizarin crimson. Together those mix up to almost a burnt umber, and let's come back up to the canvas and block this in a little stronger. I've done this painting with a brush before, but I find this keeps it very loose, very free, and we have a lot of highlights to go into it. Let's block a little more in here. As I run out of paint, it almost gives a weak, faded out effect, which is sometimes nice. But I do need more paint, so let's go back down to the palette, continually watching the design that your little sponge will give you. Every sponge seems to have its own little character, so you have to make sure that you don't get a boxwood or something that works in to an odd shape. Okay, once again, I'm blocking in and getting these trees roughed in. I need to continually load, and enough paint will make a big difference. Let's go back to the canvas and just block in that nice overhang. I'm going to kind of connect these trees. And it's kind of a padding effect. I'm working a little more quickly than I would like to get the design in, but I think you can get the idea of how you too get some interesting effects. This should be a very dark mass area over on this left edge because that's the back side of this tree, and I want the light filtering behind it to give a more dramatic impact. So I'm going to really load up with a little blue, green, umber, all my dark colors, and they're soft. I have to let you realize that the thick paints will not do this unless you thin them thoroughly with thinner, and then some of them just don't break down. Okay, we need to get some highlights on this, a few little reflections in the water, and I'm hoping to get back to those nice little branches and the highlights on the branches. Those are very important. I'm going to wet the sponge again and go into some bright yellow, maybe a touch of orange, kind of putting a variety of colors on the sponge. And I want those leaves to just dance in the sunlight. And with this, I'm going to just kind of lightly touch a little bit on the side of the trees towards the light, not losing all the colors. You'll find it occasionally it'll turn kind of green. I'm going to leave this one in shadow. And let's put a little interest of a little more greenery. Depends on the fall colors. You can work strictly in your oranges, or you can go to a lot of different colors. Let's just leave that for now. I need to develop a few branches on this, a few water lines in my rock, so I'm going to pull this one together with my detail work, which is something that you can spend a lot of time with. I'm using a little of my soft white with a liner to bring out a highlight on the edge of this little trunk. Let the light hit it, pull down, let it kind of intermix slightly. I even need to go back in and pull a little more dark back into it. Bring a little light on the edge of this tree trunk. This way you guide the light through the trees, and I let it brush mix just slightly. And if it's too harsh, you just develop it. The rocks need a little more impact, so I'm going to take the liner and just tap the highlighted edge a little more to create a little more interest there. A few water lines, both with your palette knife or just a little sparkle on the water, will add quite a bit in the areas that are where the light will hit the water. So all of these effects, I'm going to use a little blue in this and put in the shadows a little bluish white and design a few little roots that hold on to the ground. The book has a lot more detail, and I had a lot more time to finish this one up. But I think I've been able to share with you a lot of the development of the painting and some new techniques. If you've never used sponges, I suggest you try them. They're a lot of fun. I'm going to work a little more on the grasses, and I'm going to spend a little more time on the detail of the rocks. Sometimes if I have a rock up here that I'm not too happy with, I'll just plant a little bit of grass and lift it up. So I think you can see there are techniques that are offered in oil that are a little unusual, so try your watercolor techniques. They'll work for you too. Thanks so much for being with me, and have fun.
To get your Paint with Pittard 2 step-by-step instructional guide by Lynne Pittard, send $14.95 check or money order to Paint with Pittard 2, P.O. Box 1713, Department G, Delray Beach, Florida 33483, or call 1-800-942-4000. Please have your MasterCard, Visa, or American Express card handy. That's $14.95 check or money order to Paint with Pittard 2, P.O. Box 1713, Department G, Delray Beach, Florida 33483. Price includes postage and handling. This 72-page full-color guide contains the 13 paintings shown in this series.
Hardest fun for you.
Watch for more useful tips and techniques on weekdays as Bob Ross presents The Joy of Painting. That's every weekday afternoon at 2:30, right here on Channel 2. Stay with us now. Good cooking next with Boston's own Julia Child. Jeff Smith, the Frugal Gourmet at 5.
It's always up to you. Just try it, you'll like it, 'cause art is fun for you.
Paint with Pittard 2 with Lynne Pittard was made possible by a grant from Line-Nickel Artists Brushes and Graphics Plus of Florida, Incorporated, publishers of educational and instructional materials.
Local broadcast of Painting with Pittard is made possible by our members in partnership with the Prescott House Nursing Home, located in North Andover, Massachusetts, and owned and operated by the Solomon family. And with the Magic Touch Art Studio in Maynard, Massachusetts, owned and operated by Chuck O'Neill. Tonight at 8, the Nazi war machine rolls ahead full force. It's the world at war, one of the most important chronicles of conflict ever seen on television. Sir Laurence Olivier, your host. Then at 9, watch John le Carré's Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, where friends are enemies and truth and justice carry the ultimate price. And at 10, enjoy a musical 90 minutes about Andrew Lloyd Webber, composer of Evita, Cats, and Phantom of the Opera. Stay tuned.
Every performer hopes their audience will show its appreciation, its enjoyment with applause. But they set their sights and talents on that memorable performance when the audience, standing and cheering, calls for an encore. Well, here at WGBH, we hope that all of you who've supported us in the past will do so again with an encore performance of your own. Please renew your support or send us an extra gift for the best television on television by rushing your check to WGBH, Boston 02134, or by calling 492-1111 right now. That's an encore we'll never forget.
Tonight at 10. Phantom of the Opera. Just the latest by Andrew Lloyd Webber, composer of Evita, Cats, and Jesus Christ Superstar. It's super composer Andrew Lloyd Webber, tonight at 10. And then Monday at 9. It's time to decide. We've seen the polls, we've heard the speeches. Now hear top PBS correspondents with their thoughts on the issues, the candidates, and the presidency itself. It's The Last Word, a live 2-hour special report, Monday at 9. And then Wednesday at 9, Kristallnacht, the night of breaking glass, when the Nazis set out to destroy everything Jewish in Germany and Austria.
Whatever could be destroyed, it was destroyed.
Kristallnacht, Wednesday at 9, reported by Eric Severite. That's Andrew Lloyd Webber. The Last Word, a live campaign special, and Kristallnacht, all coming up right here on Channel 2. This is Channel 2 Boston. Local broadcast of Julia Child and Company is made possible by our members in partnership with the Victor Company Realtors, serving the residential real estate market in the Merrimack Valley, with offices in Andover, Boxford, Haverhill, Methuen, and Topsfield. With the Johnny Kane Company, makers of all-natural Kane's mayonnaise. And with Welch's, makers of fine products from fruit since 1869, like Welch's Squeezables, jellies, jams, and preserves. From Welch's, America's Fruit Basket.
Funding for this program is provided by this station and by other public television stations.
Child, and I'm going to have a very important lunch today with some very important people, and I'm going to end it with an absolutely delicious pear sherbet. The menu, as for the menu, I'm not going to have any first course at all. I'm going to start with a coupe of champagne, really to put on the dog a bit, and then an absolutely magnificent fish creation that I call a schulibiak, and a little salad course, and then followed by this absolutely delicious fresh pear sherbet. And I hope it's going to be a spectacular menu. At least I shall try to make it so, which I think is rather fun when you to go all out.